Tonight, surrender.
We have Zionists.
We have Zionists
who have entered the camp.
Who have entered the camp.
Colombia's president sides with pro-Hamas protesters as protests grow from Colombia and New York to California. George Will on whether the National Guard will look like Little Rock or descend into Kent State. Catch and kill.
We have a gag order, which to me is totally unconstitutional.
Prosecutors put every part of Trump's life on trial. But is what they accuse him of actually a crime? Even Jon Stewart thinks the media has lost their minds.
Seriously, are we going to follow this guy to court every day?
Dumbing down of America.
So you'll pick me up tonight at 7:45?
Oh, well, no, I got a few things to take care of first, but why don't we make it 7:45?
For the first time in a century, IQ numbers fall. Can we break our kids' social media addiction before it's too late?
I turned on the microwave and I had my phone in there.
Welcome to the fairest show on television. First tonight, when it comes to the protests on college campuses, we might be worried here about the wrong thing. New video shows the anti-Israel protests sweeping American college campuses are anything but peaceful. Live pictures right now of New York City. Demonstrations at NYU and Columbia University in New York show absolutely no sign of letting up. In fact, they are growing. The president of Columbia just effectively surrendered to the protesters. The school announced mostly virtual classes for the rest of the semester. Rather than have Jewish kids come on campus and feel safe, everybody can stay at home. Protests are forming on the campuses across the Midwest, Michigan and Minnesota, as well as out west. UC Berkeley, no surprise there. Cal Poly as well, UCLA, you see them all across the map. At least 2 Republican senators say they want the National Guard deployed to the campuses to protect Jewish students. Here's Tom Cotton of Arkansas earlier.
If Eric Adams won't send the NYPD to protect these Jewish students, if Kathy Hochul won't send the National Guard, Joe Biden has a duty to protect these Jewish students from what is a nascent pogrom on these campuses.
And there's the issue. Of course, the National Guard could escort students to and from class. But what about when they get into class? Many of the Columbia faculty support the protesters who are parroting Hamas talking points. The National Guard doesn't fix that. We shouldn't worry as much about the protests as we do about the ideology driving them. Ground zero of this movement is here at Columbia University. The news networks are showing up every day, and you can see the live pictures right there. End aid to Israel. That's part of this conversation. And the news networks are calling them mostly peaceful protests, kind of like the 2020 riots. But we have new video from inside the camp at night. It shows the demonstrators strike a much different tone when they think the TV cameras are gone. Watch what happened when a few Jewish students at Columbia showed up on their own campus.
We have Zionists.
We have Zionists
who have entered the camp.
who have entered the camp.
We are going to create a human chain.
We are going to create a human chain
Where I am standing.
where I am standing
So that they do not pass this point.
they do not pass this point.
NewsNation senior political contributor George Will standing by with reaction. We start tonight with NewsNation's Rich McHugh, who gained rare access into the camp this afternoon. And part of this story is fascinating, Rich, that they actually don't want the media in, and they don't want to talk, at least very much, about what their beliefs are.
No, it's pretty wild, Leland. I went in there today, and they have the whole ecosystem. There's a security checkpoint. I had to show my press credentials. They have a code of conduct. There's like this hierarchy inside there. There are leaders and spokespeople. One of the spokesmen, who sounds eerily similar to the person we just heard, came over and spoke to us. I asked the question. I said, look, some of the protesters who were arrested were saying, "We are Hamas, we are Hamas." Do you align with that? Here's his response. Take a look.
Here at this demonstration, this encampment, it has always been about decolonization, anti-genocide, anti-war, and for Colombia to divest. We cannot speak to the protests or counter-protests that are happening outside of the walls of the university.
Now, I asked them if they're speaking to school administration. They said yes. They have a lead negotiator. I said, well, what are you negotiating? They said, we cannot disclose that. Graduation's coming up May 15th, and what happens there is anybody's guess, Leland.
Wow. Decolonization, a.k.a. the end of Israel, would be what they view that as. Rich, thank you very much. Keep up the great work. We appreciate it. George is with us now. I understand why the students want to negotiate with the university. I don't understand why the university feels the need to negotiate with the students.
The university actually made a statement, Leland, that security is our highest priority. Parents paying $80 grand a year for tuition might think that education ought to be their highest priority.
And security would be given, perhaps.
Of course, part of the problem, Leland, is that in 1960, a survey showed that college students spent 40 hours a week either in class or studying for class. That's a working week. Now it's down to 27 hours. Why not? Because you have great inflation. No one's going to fail, particularly. Everyone's going to get an A at Yale. So what do they do with their spare time? Look at what they're doing with their spare time.
To that point, though, why does the university, who gets money from parents at $70,000 to $80,000 a year when put in tuition, room, and board, feel absolutely no fear of parents who might like their children to learn from professors who do not support Hamas?
Yeah, well, a lot of parents simply pony up the money to get the prestige, the credential, the momentum for their children, and learning is secondary, I'm afraid. But asking these people what they believe what Hamas believes, and Hamas is nothing if not clear. They want to complete the Holocaust. So let's not prettify what's going on here. These are people urging the mass murder of Jews.
So why, again, I'll start with the president of the university, who could end this in an afternoon, and certainly if it was about anybody but Jews, it would be ended if they were saying the same thing about gay people or black people or whatever. So why does the university feel the need to negotiate?
First of all, university administrations are afraid of their students, and they're afraid of their faculty, who are very like the students in some of their monochrome beliefs that permeate these campuses. That's part of it. And Leland, we're dealing with such strange young people nowadays. One of these children who was expelled from his dorm because of this, and says, now I have to go out and find a rental apartment that will tolerate my emotional support rabbit. I'm not making this up. Yeah. He has a bunny.
Yeah, he has a bunny that he brings to protest, the protest bunny. Quote from Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. Today, what many people are demonstrating in America are doing, of course we should salute them and be grateful to them. And this runs in a thread because we did a little research on the person that Rich McHugh talked to who wanted decolonization, a.k.a. the end of Israel, because it is viewed as a colony. And we found a picture of him, Bob Morrissey and Andrew Roberts did, from 2021. We're still working on the picture, but he was featured in the Boston Globe as a leader of the Black Lives Matter organization. And if you put these two groups together and you kind of go distill them down, Black Lives Matter was never about black lives. The pro-Palestine group is not really about Palestinians. They are about tearing down Western institutions, capital L, liberal democracies. Why is that not recognized?
It will be recognized if we just let them talk long enough, because it's very clear, not only when they supported what happened in Israel on October 7th, but when Iran attacked with drones and missiles, and they instantly rallied around Iran, it became very clear that they're not so much pro-Palestinian as they are anti-West, and particularly anti the leading Western nation, their own, the United States.
Yeah, it does say something, and maybe something good about America, that even people who hate America and profess to hate America still enjoy staying here rather than going back to, say, Gaza or one of these other places. Tom Cotton, the National Guard needs to come in. Does the National Guard look like Little Rock, where it was the 101st Airborne that came in and secured the situation so that young black kids could go to school? Or does it look like Kent State, Vietnam-era protests? We'll play that clip.
Leave this area immediately.
In some ways, and there's really no similarities between the anti-war protests and what we're seeing right now, but without an administration that wants to change things, sending in the National Guard may not do any good.
It won't do good, and it will also violate fundamental principles of federalism. There's no reason to believe that the local authorities, A, are unwilling to, and B, incapable of restoring order on that campus. In Little Rock, you had the governor of the state, and all the local authorities were against enforcing federal law. That's what forced Dwight Eisenhower's hand in sending in the paratroopers. There's no need for this, and we shouldn't federalize this. This is a local law and order.
Look, in the NYPD, when they were asked to clear out NYU, they did it in 30 minutes. So it's not as though they can't. It's whether they're invited onto Columbia's property.
And this is not a free speech issue, in fact. All speech restrictions allow for time, place, and manner requirements. You can't, if you have a loudspeaker and you want to have a rally, fine, but don't go to a hospital or don't go near a school during school hours.
Well, you want to protest, fine. You can't form a human chain to block Jewish kids from coming on campus. We have the side-by-side picture of the BLM leader in 2021 and now the pro-Palestine leader or anti-Israel leader in 2024. Look, 2020 was an election year. 2024 is an election year. 2020, the BLM movement had an enormous effect on the election. I think you could argue sort of changed the minds of a lot of suburban women who wanted to suddenly be allies and fit in, and they were going to support Joe Biden because of the BLM movement. Is the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas movement going to have the same effect?
It is not. It's going to underscore what I think is the subtext of this campaign. It's not the economy. It's not this, that, and the other thing. It's disorder. A sense that we have no southern border any longer. It's the sense that your vast swaths of our cities are no-go zones for law-abiding people. A general sense that things are spinning out of control. And Mr. Biden's going to be blamed for that because it's true.
Well, and also Mr. Biden's in a pickle, right? We saw that yesterday where he effectively both sides things of very fine people on both sides of these protests was his effective message. Mr. Will, good to see you as always, sir. Thank you very much. All right. Playboy Playmates, porn stars, and the National Enquirer. I have your attention now. It's just day 2 of the Trump hush money trial. It's a dream scenario for cable networks, but they can't show it on TV. Why we aren't getting the whole story about what's happening in the courtroom, and new information on just how powerful the group God's Misfits were in Oklahoma. They ran part of northern Oklahoma. An insider from their community sheds light on why they thought they could get away with the murder of 2 moms and what they had planned next. Weird thing happened in Donald Trump's trial today. Prosecution's first witness testified to a whole bunch of things that sound sleazy, but by definition aren't actual crimes. There aren't cameras in the courtroom, so I have to explain what David Pecker said. He's the old boss at the National Enquirer, a very dear friend of Donald Trump's. And he testified there was what they call a catch and kill scheme. he and Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, would find out about people who plan to tell negative stories about Donald Trump and then kill the story. In one instance, Pecker says he bought a doorman's phony story that Trump had an illegitimate child. Pecker paid $30,000 for the exclusive rights and then buried the story. He says he paid Stormy Daniels $130,000 for her story. Prosecutors say another $150,000 went to Playboy model Karen McDougal. Okay, stipulated. All of those things happened. No one disputes that. New York City criminal defense attorney Michael DeSharo joins us now. How much of this is sex, lies, videotapes, Trump's terrible, so there must be a crime somewhere?
Thank you for having me, Leland. And that's exactly right. They started off their case with the sexiest things you could bring into the courtroom, right? I mean, most trials are boring. This is the facts of this trial are extremely boring. We're talking about an accounting procedure. So you bring in a porn star, you bring in the National Enquirer, you bring in the illegitimate kids, and they're putting up all these things that have no bearing on proving the crime. It's simply a way to hopefully titillate the jury in framing the defendant, Donald Trump, as this sleazy guy who'll do anything to and cover it up to get away with it.
Yeah, and look, Michael, I have to say to our viewers, you've been spot on about this stuff all the way through, and we're trying to be fair here. And being fair means being fair to Donald Trump, but also being fair to the prosecution. And I've yet to find a lawyer who doesn't involve politics who makes the point that the prosecution's got a good case here. If there's any out there, you're welcome to come on and talk about it. And I think that kind of goes to what Mitt Romney said today. The Republican senator who does not like Donald Trump. Here he is.
I think everybody has made their own assessment of President Trump's character, and so far as I know, you don't pay someone $130,000 not to have sex with you.
And an issue here is not whether Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump had sex. An issue is whether or not it was accounted for correctly in the books of the Trump organization. Looking forward, if they're going to actually prove a crime was committed, what do they have to get to?
They have to get to the fact that this was put down in the accounting as an expense, and it was, most importantly, that Donald Trump himself, the defendant, they must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it or that he ordered it to be done. Because nobody believes Donald Trump is himself entering numbers into a ledger. And the person that's supposed to get you there is Michael Cohen, a convicted perjurer. And in terms of fairness, Leland, I was a prosecutor for 6 years. I sat in those chairs. I argued to those juries. And publicly, I don't discuss politics, but I do discuss facts of the case. And every single legal expert that I've spoken to in New York City, regardless of their political stripes, thinks this is a very weak case. And the weakest part to me, and I can't wait for this, is going to be the testimony and cross of a known perjurer who every day is on the internet, on social media, attacking Donald Trump. Michael Cohen isn't just a liar. He's a anti-Trump fanatic. So it's going to be very easy to paint him as somebody who'll say anything about Donald Trump in order to get him convicted.
Just purely from a political standpoint, and we're going to get to the media coverage later in the show, but at some level, you'd almost think that the prosecution and Democrats at all are happy in a way that this isn't on TV. I was talking to one of the Trump spokespeople last night, and they said they wish it was on television. They wish the country could see this case unfold as it unfolds. When you get down to this argument right now, and you're watching this play out for the prosecution, where do we go in terms of sort of accuracy in reporting this going forward? You're a lawyer. Is it accurate to call this the hush money case because there was hush money paid? Or is it more accurate to call it the business records case because that's the crime he's charged with?
I think it's even more boring than that. You can call it there's a famous phrase in accounting that I once learned, LIFO, FIFO. It's some kind of obscure accounting term. This is one of the most boring and one of the most unique cases that's ever been brought. I've never seen a misdemeanor whose statute of limitations has expired be raised from the dead and brought up to be a felony and get an indictment on that. So, but the Supreme Court of New York, what we call the Court of Appeals, has solved this in some way. You can now get the full transcript free of charge of the trial.
Right. No, you can every day it's coming out. Still not the same as seeing it on TV. And you point out the cross of Michael Cohen would be must-see TV if we had it. Michael, thank you. A long way to go. They say 6 weeks or so of all of this. So we'll keep talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Lynn.
Yeah. We're getting dumber, evidently, in America. IQs are falling for the first time in a century. New research suggests it, might be tied to technology. Is there finally proof iPhones, tablets, iPads are making Americans' kids dumber?
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Turns out your mom is right. Social media and video games do rot the brain. New research shows IQ scores dropped for the first time in a century. We're literally getting dumber. For 100 years, people have been getting smarter until now. Maybe that has something to do with how much time your kids or grandkids spend staring at a screen. 8 to 10-year-olds, 6 hours a day. 11 to 14, 9 hours a day. 15 to 18, 7.5 hours a day. Professor Stephen Dombrowski studies IQ, actually how people learn, how they get smart at Rider University in New Jersey. Professor, it's good to see you. Perfect man for this conversation. When we first read this study, that we are getting dumber or not getting smarter, a lot of people linked it to handwriting, and they no longer teach cursive and handwriting in school. Is it that simple?
I think it's not that simple. I think that it's probably more linked to media use, moving away from reading, moving away from writing itself. You can make the case more empirically that we're less engaging in reading and writing activities rather than just specific handwriting. I think that's somewhat of a big leap to make.
Does it have anything to do with the fact that standards are just getting lower, right? Participation trophies, people getting passed through grades when they actually haven't been forced to learn anything?
I mean, that could be a variable that contributes. I do think that we've had 2 years of COVID, potentially lost learning. But the study itself, if I'm not mistaken, that was published in just last year. William Ravelli out of Northwestern. I've done some correspondence with him on some projects. That was based on data out of 2006 and then later on. So I think the link is potentially more related to kind of media use. Who wants to let a book ruin a good movie, right? When you have access to YouTube and to cable TV such as NewsNation, you can gather your information from there.
Man, now it's us who's making everybody dumber, or more angry. I don't know. Look, I think about this, and it's fascinating, right? Because even in my own life, I grew up reading a lot, but I read far less now and look at Instagram more. So right, so there is this linkage that you're sort of consuming, like Lucky Charms rather than eating your broccoli, right? The mental equivalent.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So
I think. Yeah, sorry.
I think about education rankings by country. China, #1, South Korea, Finland, Hong Kong, Singapore. The United States is 31st. We don't seem to have a real big desire to turn this around. Can we, if we wanted to?
I mean, I think we can. I think, the United States is an interesting country. We have varied socioeconomic strata. I think if we took a look at middle and upper class and compared, that'd be interesting to break that down. These are gross numbers. And so let's look at the different strata and individuals that are from upper and middle class get access to better education. So I'd wonder about those particular global rankings. I think
great point. Let me just ask you this, though, just IQ scores. China 104.1, the United States 97.43. That's a difference of, on average, 7 points, a little less.
Yeah, about 7 points, right.
Is that really significant? Like, what does that translate to in terms of real life?
It's a score. It's a numerical score. I think there are many factors that go into success. There's absolutely no doubt that IQ is correlated with vocational success, with success in college, but it is just one score of many. You have personality factors, you have other variables that contribute to success itself. It could also be cultural, too. Is a country such as China what I call drill and kill it, where they're just hammering in, requiring kids to focus exclusively on academics and not be a well-rounded individual, participate in sports. And I don't know the answer to that question, but it could be culturally bound too. That kids are, hey, the school day is just the first phase, and then after school there's additional education that goes on. So that could account for it as well. And I do think
we're not getting any more. We're not getting any more EQ from social media either. So or our screen. So there's that.
Yeah.
There's that as well. Professor, this is great. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Leland.
Yeah, thank you. The grandmother accused of killing 2 moms in Oklahoma allegedly confessed to the killings. Police say Tiffany Adams, 3 other suspects, ran an anti-government group called God's Misfits. Tiffany Adams once ran for office in Oklahoma. This part of rural Oklahoma that God's Misfits lived in, they basically ran that part of the state. She's accused of masterminding the killing of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. Butler was the mother of Adams' 2 grandkids and involved in a bitter custody dispute. Joining us now, Brian Entin, NewsNation senior correspondent. Spent a week in Kansas and Oklahoma tracking the case. He is in for Cuomo tonight. And you've got the person who ran against Tiffany Adams for state rep. There's not a lot of times that you've got people who are running for state, for state rep and offices who are then arrested for murder. How big of a deal was Tiffany Adams?
Yeah, we've got the state senator on tonight, Leland, who knew Tiffany Adams, who knew all of the suspects, had some very strange feelings about Tiffany Adams long before this, and he's going to explain that coming up in the next hour on Cuomo. But we've learned a lot just in the last 2 days. These new court documents have come out. The bond paperwork normally can be pretty boring, but there were some explosive new nuggets, Leland, especially about Grandma Tiffany, who you see right there on the screen. You mentioned the confession in the prosecution's argument not to grant her bond. They said that in a recorded statement after the arrest, and they worded it interestingly, they said that she indicated her responsibility for the death of the deceased. So they didn't use the word confession, but they said that she indicated her responsibility. Exactly what that means, we don't know. It certainly sounds like a confession. Also, there was some new information, Leland, about how she had planned to murder Veronica, one of the victims, earlier this year, and they went into greater detail. They say that she planned to lure Veronica out of her house and had a plan to kill her by dropping an anvil on the windshield of her car after luring her out of her house. And if you don't know what an anvil is, it's what a blacksmith uses. It's a big iron block. Think Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote. So this was going to be a brutal murder that she planned. That's new. That came out in some of these new docs. And then also the fact that they said that she knew the way that the judge walked home. That she had said that to some of the people who she had relations with, that she wouldn't get caught, and she knew the way that the judge walked home. So even the judge, and we presume it was the judge in the custody case that led up to this murder, even the judge, it appears, may have been in danger, Leland.
All right, so you think about this God's Misfits group, and part of the reason that this story is so interesting is because they had this anti-government cult, if you want to call it that. How much of this, right, is an anti-government group in that they felt like they kind of ran or owned this part of northern Oklahoma? I know you were there. Did you get the feeling that people were scared more of this group than they were, say, of the law.
Yes, and people were very, very scared to talk about them, to speak out about them, until the arrests were made because this group was so powerful in the area. I mean, I've told you before, they own a lot of land. She was the chair of the GOP party. She was on the hospital board. Everybody knew them. They had a lot of money. They had a lot of power. They had a lot of land. Land is important there, and people knew to just sort of back off and stay away. And you mentioned God's Misfits, which is this anti-government religious cult that the prosecution says they were in. In some of this new paperwork, it even talks about that and just how dangerous the group was. It says that they have a history of violent interactions, including death threats and intimidations against individuals who disagree with their ideas. They abide by their own philosophy and have no regard for the sanctity of human life. So that right there tells you why this entire county in western Oklahoma was just so scared of these people, especially Grandma Tiffany, because everyone says Grandma Tiffany was the mastermind behind it all.
Absolutely fascinating. You've got the state rep coming on. Look, you think about it, Brian, there was a judge who had to resign because he gave you an interview and talked about these people. So that says an awful lot about this case. Brian, have a great show. We're going to check back in with you throughout the week. You're in for Cuomo coming up here at the top of the hour. Have a great show, buddy.
Thanks, Leland.
All right, thank you. The media, of course, said no. No, not this time. We've learned our lesson on covering Donald Trump. The media claimed they wouldn't give him the coverage they did in the past. And then they dove right back in. Why the media just cannot quit their toxic relationship with Trump.
All of us have learned some very valuable lessons from the last couple of years in delineating what's significant, what's important.
So brave. Well done.
Jon Stewart on The Daily Show laid it out.
Seriously, are we going to follow this guy to court every day? Are you trying to make this OJ? It's not a chase. He's commuting. Perhaps if we limit the coverage to the issues at hand and try not to create an all-encompassing spectacle of the most banal of details, perhaps that would help.
Joining us now, Colby Hall, founding editor at Mediaite, NewsNation contributor. Would it help, Colby?
Well, I don't know what would help. I don't think anything would help at this point. You know, for a media that has forever loved to deride former President Trump as a reality host, they still love to cover the reality show. In fact, they create the reality show. Like you set it up perfectly. They can't quit him. And, you know, it's a fascinating story. It's historic. And it's made more complicated by the fact that there aren't cameras in the courtroom. However, that lends itself to journalists to add color for, to tell the story. And very often it comes across as sort of, the color is yellow. It's like, sometimes feels like yellow journalism, like the bias seeps through. So it's not proud, for a variety of reasons, it's not a proud time for the media to cover Trump.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point that lost in this vacuum without cameras in the courtroom is fairness, right? Because the fair thing to do would be to just let all of us see this trial that we've been told is going to be this huge thing and so important and decide for ourselves. You spoke a little bit about sort of the filling of time, shall we say, about Donald Trump and the trial. Here's just some clips.
I can report firsthand that the courtroom smells like old soup and stale breath.
Trump looks like he is glowering. I don't know how it's art. It's not necessarily it's artistic journalism, but it's not a photograph.
There were people in the courtroom who are aware of the fact that Donald Trump was passing gas.
And Donald Trump, according to the observations of reporters in the courtroom, falls asleep.
Of all of those, analyzing the sketch artists as if it's going to provide some great insight, how much of this, Colby, is because there's a love of the reality show, there's a desire to talk about Donald Trump, but there is not a desire in a way, to actually talk about the case. And that's because this case in particular is so thin, is so weak. And that's not us saying that. That's almost every legal analyst who doesn't have a political axe to grind. Every former prosecutor I talked to in New York goes, there's just not a case there.
Well, especially up until today, there's been the trial really started sort of in earnest today, right? Like in terms, or yesterday, I should say. And up until then, it was just all conjecture and looks on faces and this sort of fake news of gas passing. And, you know, it does seem as though he may have nodded off, but like who among us hasn't gotten tired in an event like that? So I think that shows him as being human. But whether or not the case is thin, I'll tell you one thing that was really interesting today was that David Pecker basically revealed that the National Enquirer was working hand in glove with the Trump campaign. Is that illegal to the degree that Alvin Bragg is? That's a stretch, obviously, to say, but it's another side of the media angle where, you know, there is coordination. And is it really that different from what we see on a lot of left-leaning cable news outlets that are recovering the story as though it's fait accompli, although it's just assumed that he's guilty and not, you know, up to the jury to decide.
Right, and today we heard about that there was this sort of conversation that happens on Fridays between the legal analysts on a number of the left-leaning channels to discuss the cases against Donald Trump. Right. I thought it was fascinating just in terms of process, right, that you've now got live blogging on TV of the trial itself. Both CNN and MSNBC are putting up a live blog and sort of talking about the moments that they can report on as it goes through. The screen grabs look remarkably similar. And as fascinating as, you know, David Pecker admitting kind of the obvious on the stand might be, it is at the expense of coverage of what's happening on America's college campuses, right? These sort of massive protests. Live pictures right now, I believe, of Columbia University, where the protesters say they are going to hold a press conference this evening at 8 p.m. So they feel the college or the university is going to come negotiate with them. Why, we don't know. But for a media that was so obsessed with covering the BLM protests, right, and so whitewashed a lot of what was being demanded and said, 4 years later, they haven't changed. They haven't learned anything, have they?
Well, it's stunning that there are people that are self-identifying as pro-Hamas, whether they're being hyperbolic or not. It doesn't matter. They're identifying as pro-Hamas, and they're openly threatening pro-Israel Jewish students in a really sort of unsettling and threatening and violent way. And the fact that, you know, Columbia is just sort of the flashpoint, but it appears to be spreading to a number of campuses. Yeah. Look, I get it. The problem is that this is a complicated story that no one wants to talk about it because it's so ugly.
Yeah, but hold on, Colby. I'm going to give you the last word. I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds. Hold on. It's not that complicated, though. If there were African American students being attacked, okay, and told to go back to Africa, if there were gay students who are being chanted at, gay students have entered the Quad, we're going to form a human chain to stop them. MSNBC and CNN would be losing their minds over that. Why is it okay when it's Jews?
100%. Well, it's not. And what I meant to say was the underlying conflict in the Middle East going back 50 years is complicated. You're right. It's, as I just said earlier, it's moral clarity. You don't threaten students based on their belief, their religion, anything. And this should be page one, above the fold, leading the story. And instead, we're getting car shots of Trump commuting to the courtroom because you got to fill airtime. So it's not a proud moment for American media right now.
Well, we always appreciate you calling balls and strikes on it. Colby, it's good to see you as always. Thank you.
Leland.
Many of the protesters on America's college campuses aren't actually Americans. They're foreign students. Why the State Department doesn't revoke the visas of people who clearly support terrorists when we come back. Welcome back. A few thoughts from you to close out the show after we asked in War Notes for your thoughts on what to call the Trump trial. Ken wrote, better name for Trump trial, Trump guilty regardless of the law. Well, Ken, you're onto something. It's how many people feel. The problem is you've got a lot of people thinking he's guilty of something, so the jury might as well convict him. The founder of the Soviet secret police used to say, show me the man, and I'll find you the crime. The New York Attorney General said as much about getting Donald Trump. Steve emailed last week, my wife and I are daily viewers of your show. Please keep up the great work. Question regarding the Columbia students who were recently arrested and suspended and are here on student visas. If they're chanting anti-Semitic tropes and aligning with Hamas, why aren't they deported? Steve, that is an excellent, excellent question. These aren't tropes, though. These are people actively aligning with terrorist organizations, actively saying, I am Hamas. It certainly doesn't seem like something visitors should be shouting in our country. We're going to check with the Department of State and see if anybody is looking into that. After Thursday's segment with the White Rule Rage authors, S wrote to War Notes, we generally enjoy the time we spend with you each evening, but why do you have people like Paul Waldman and Thomas Schaller on your show? Great question. That's what makes us different here. It's what makes us different for On Balance and what makes us different at NewsNation. Paul and Thomas wrote a book called White Rule Rage. Amazon describes it as a searing portrait and damning takedown of America's proudest citizens, who are also the least likely to defend its core principles. Of course, the founding fathers had a lot of white rule rage, as did the Union soldiers during the Civil War, as did the farm boys who headed to World War I and World War II. I digress. We are glad Paul and Thomas join us. They represent about how 30 to 35% of America feels. They look down on white rule Americans. Most primetime hosts and shows only have people on who agree with them. That's not what this show is about. If you're willing to have an honest and productive conversation, we're willing to have it, and frankly, we trust the audience that they want to see it every night. You show up here to not necessarily be comforted, to be affirmed. You show up here because you believe in fairness. You believe in hearing and talking about ideas that you may not agree with, that you may find disagreeable. But that's what we do here every night. We show up for a fair and fearless conversation. With that, we turn it over to Brian Entin in New York.